You are walking through the woods behind an old property line. You spot it. A collapsing structure most people would call junk. A pile of stone, a sagging roof, weathered timber leaning against nothing. You keep walking. That was your first mistake, because what you just passed by is exactly what preppers are missing. 3 specific types of abandoned buildings hold the answers modern survival channels refuse to talk about, and the Amish have been quietly using this same knowledge for over 200 years. The first time I walked a back 40 near Charm, Ohio, with an old Amish farmer named Mervyn, he pointed at what looked like a rock pile to me and said, "That's a summer kitchen from 1889, and it's worth more than your whole basement." I laughed. He didn't. And by the end of that afternoon, I understood why the man who preserved this knowledge lived through the Great Depression without a single ration book. Stay with me, because there's a document from the 1934 USDA Farm Structures Survey that names the exact 3 building types most people bulldoze without a second thought. And every one of them can be recreated on land you already own, using materials you already have. Let me tell you about the first type, the stone spring house. You've probably seen one and not known what you were looking at. Small, squat. Half buried into a hillside near a stream or a natural low point, most people assume it's an old shed, maybe a root cellar someone gave up on. They're wrong. A stone spring house was the original refrigerator, and it worked without a single kilowatt for over 150 years in some Pennsylvania farms. Here's what the average American never learned. In 1923, Penn State Extension ran a study on temperature stability inside traditional stone spring houses across Lancaster County. The interior temperature stayed between 50 and 54 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, no matter what the weather did outside. That's colder than your kitchen refrigerator when you leave the door open too long, and it did it with 0 moving parts. The secret was the combination of 3 things working together: flowing water underneath or beside the structure, stone walls at least 18 inches thick, and a roof designed to shed heat, not trap it. The Amish never abandoned this design because they never needed to. Mervyn's grandfather built one in 1937 that still keeps butter, milk, eggs, and hard cheese for weeks without any electricity. Weeks. When the grid went down across Ohio in the 2003 blackout, the English families around him lost everything in their freezers. He lost nothing, because the men who benefited from selling you an electric refrigerator every 12 years had no reason to remind you that stone and cold water do the same job for a century. But here's the tension nobody is telling you about. If you find one of these on abandoned property or on the edge of your own land, the stones themselves are worth more than the building was ever worth new, because they've been cured by 1.5 centuries of moisture and mineral deposit. You can dismantle a collapsed spring house and rebuild it in a new location using the exact same stones. The Amish call this borrowed gold, and it is the reason a family in Holmes County can keep 300 pounds of dairy products fresh through the summer without paying a utility bill. Now, the second building type is where things get strange, because this one preppers walk past every single day and never recognize what it is. The bank barn foundation. Most abandoned properties in the Northeast and Midwest have one. It looks like a half-buried stone wall in the shape of a rectangle, maybe 20 feet by 30, sometimes larger. The wooden barn that sat on top rotted away decades ago. What's left is the foundation, and that foundation, buried into the north side of a hill, is one of the most sophisticated passive climate systems ever built on American soil. In 1889, a Swiss immigrant named Hans Herr documented in his farm journals held today in the Lancaster Mennonite Historical Society archives that his bank barn foundation maintained 58 degrees in July and 42 degrees in January without any heat source. He stored root vegetables, cured meats, and fermented cabbage in there for 8 months at a stretch. Cornell University's Agricultural Engineering Department revisited these structures in 1978 and confirmed the numbers. The earth on 3 sides acts as a thermal battery. The single exposed wall, always facing south, gets just enough winter sun to prevent freezing. It is a root cellar, a cold pantry, and a fermentation chamber, all in one structure, and it was designed before electricity existed. If you find one of these foundations on abandoned land, or if there's one already on your property that you've been ignoring, you have the bones of something that would cost $40,000 to build new. And here's the part that stopped me cold when Mervyn explained it. The reason so many of these foundations sit abandoned isn't because they stopped working. It's because after the Second World War, the USDA began pushing farmers towards centralized refrigeration and away from what they called primitive storage. There was a specific program in 1948 that offered subsidies to farmers who tore down their old cold storage and installed electric alternatives. The families that refused to sign up, most of them were Amish. And most of those foundations are still working today, holding food that would spoil in your kitchen in 3 days. Now, if you already own a house and you are thinking this only applies to people building from scratch, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. You don't need to find an abandoned bank barn foundation to use this principle. If your house was built before 1980, you almost certainly have an unfinished corner of your basement on the north side that sits against undisturbed earth. That corner is thermally identical to a bank barn foundation. The Amish taught me to test it this way. Take a cheap thermometer, set it in that corner, leave it there for 24 hours in the middle of summer, and again in the middle of winter. If it reads between 40 and 60 degrees both times, you have a natural cold room hiding in your own house that you've been treating as storage for old paint cans. To convert it, you do 3 things. You seal that corner off with a simple insulated stud wall, no permit needed, because you're not adding plumbing or electrical. You install a small passive vent at floor level and another near the ceiling to allow air convection, and you line the floor with river stone or brick, which acts as a thermal mass. Total cost, done right, is under $200. You just built yourself a cold pantry that runs on 0 electricity and holds enough food to feed a family for a full winter. And this is only one page from a much larger buried archive. Everything I just walked you through, the spring house, the bank barn foundation, the basement conversion, is drawn from what the Amish call the field vault, the full set of home systems for heating, cooling, food storage, pest control, and off-grid living that got quietly erased when the utility companies took over. I've pulled the complete 3-volume collection together as the Complete Field Vault, and there's a limited time offer on it right now. You'll find it linked in the description, and you can scan the QR code on your screen if you'd rather grab it that way. It's the rest of the archive you just got a single taste of. Now, let's keep going, because the third building type is the one nobody sees coming. The third abandoned structure preppers always ignore is the smokehouse, and I know what you're thinking. A smokehouse is for smoking meat. Everyone knows that. But that is exactly what someone wanted you to think. Because a traditional Amish smokehouse, the small, blackened, square wooden building you might find behind a farmhouse, was never just for meat. It was a year-round food preservation station that handled cured meats, dried fruits, aged cheeses, salted fish, and even long-term grain storage, all in one structure, all without electricity. Auburn University's Food Science Department published a report in 1962 that studied smokehouse interiors that had been in continuous use for over 80 years. What they found was that the walls themselves, saturated with decades of hardwood smoke, contained natural antibacterial and antifungal compounds that continued to protect food long after the fire had gone out. The smoke had literally become part of the wood. Any food stored inside was protected from spoilage in a way that no plastic container or vacuum seal has ever matched. This is the reason an Amish grandmother in Holmes County can hang a country ham in the smokehouse in November and still be slicing off good, safe, delicious meat the following August. 8 months. No refrigeration, no preservatives, nothing but wood, smoke, and time. The suppression of this knowledge is not accidental. In 1967, the FDA began classifying home-cured meats as a public health concern. New regulations required commercial smokehouses to install stainless steel interiors, which destroyed the very layer of smoked wood that made traditional smokehouses work. Overnight, the industrial version of a smokehouse became less effective than the version built by an Amish grandfather in 1890. The old smokehouses were abandoned, the knowledge was buried, and the families that quietly kept using their traditional smokehouses just stopped talking about it in public. Now here is what nobody is telling you. If you find an abandoned smokehouse on a piece of land, even one that looks like it's falling down the wood is worth more than a truckload of new lumber. Those planks, blackened by a century of hardwood smoke, are essentially pre-treated with natural preservatives. You can dismantle an old smokehouse and reuse those exact boards to line the interior of a new one, transferring decades of preservation power to a fresh structure. Mervin's cousin built a smokehouse in 1994 using salvaged wood from a collapsed 1902 smokehouse 2 townships over. He has been curing meat in it for 30 years without a single case of spoilage. Not one. But here is where the story takes a turn. Because there is one more piece of knowledge, the technique that pulls all of this together that I did not fully understand until I read a document I was not supposed to find. In the archives of the Ohio Historical Society, there is a survey conducted in 1938 by a man named Elmer Beachy. He was a county extension agent who spent 2 years documenting Amish home food systems across Wayne and Holmes counties, Ohio. His report was filed. It was never widely distributed. And in that report, on page 47, he describes what he calls the triangle method. It is the single most important piece of practical wisdom I have ever heard about food preservation, and I have never seen it in a single modern homesteading book, video, or article. Here is what Elmer Beachy documented. Every self-sufficient Amish farm he surveyed had 3 structures positioned in a specific geometric relationship to each other. A spring house on the coldest, wettest point of the property, usually near a stream or seep. A bank barn foundation dug into the north face of the nearest hillside. And a smokehouse placed exactly between the two, but on higher, drier ground. The 3 buildings were never randomly located. They were positioned so that food could move between them in a specific seasonal cycle. Fresh dairy and vegetables started in the spring house. As the season changed, they moved to the bank barn foundation for longer storage. Meat that was cured in the smokehouse was rotated into the bank barn for aging. It was a 3-station food preservation system that handled every category of food in every season for an entire family, using nothing but the natural properties of stone, earth, wood, and smoke. The genius of the triangle method is that no single structure has to do everything. Each one does what it does best. And the short distance between them, Beachy documented an ideal spacing of 40 to 60 feet, meant that food could be moved by a single person carrying a single basket in a matter of minutes. Here is how you apply this on your own property this weekend. Even if you cannot build all 3 buildings, walk your land, find the coldest, wettest low point, find a north-facing slope, find a piece of higher, drier ground between them, mark those 3 spots. You have just identified the exact locations where, over the next few years, you can build a food preservation system that will outlive you, outlive your grandchildren, and never send you a single utility bill. And if you already have a structure on any of those 3 spots, a shed, a corner of a basement, an old outbuilding, you can start converting it this month using the principles I have already given you. Elmer Beachy's report ends with a sentence that I read 3 times before I understood it. He wrote, "The Amish do not preserve food. They preserve the conditions in which food preserves itself." That is the entire secret. That is what has been taken from us. And that is what the preppers ignoring these 3 abandoned buildings will never understand until it is too late. You did not just learn about 3 buildings today, you learned about a way of living that was engineered to make you free. Free from the grid, free from the grocery store, free from the quiet fear that if the systems fail, your family goes hungry. That freedom was not lost. It was hidden. And now it is back in your hands. If you are the kind of man who believes that real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect someone else's profit, you already know what to do next. Tell me in the comments which of the 3 structures do you already have on your property, even if you did not know what it was. The spring house, the bank barn foundation, or the smokehouse? Leave a comment right now, even 1 word, because I read every single one and I want to know what you are working with. And if you are ready to keep recovering what was taken, subscribe to this channel. This is not a subscription. This is you joining a quiet movement of people rebuilding the knowledge our grandfathers had and our fathers were told to forget. The next video is going to show you the exact wood species Amish builders used to make a smokehouse that outlasts 3 generations. There is one specific tree that most Americans have in their backyard right now, and they do not know what it is worth. I will see you there. Before you close this video and go about your day, I want to give you something more, because the truth is, 3 buildings is only the beginning of what has been forgotten. And the men and women who are quietly building lives of independence right now in every corner of this country are not stopping at 3. They are looking at every abandoned structure, every collapsing foundation, every ruined chimney standing alone in a field, and they are asking the right question. Not what is this, but what was this for, and why did we stop building it? Let me tell you about a place I visited in the hills of eastern Kentucky, about 40 minutes outside of Hazard, where an old man named Clayton Meade showed me something I had never seen before. He was 81 years old at the time, moved slow, but his eyes were sharp as flint. He walked me out past his garden, past his chicken coop, past the little creek that ran through the back of his property, and he stopped in front of what looked like a pile of stones half sunk into the hillside. He said, "My grandfather built this in 1911. And I said, "Built what?" Because I could not see it. And he said, "Boy, that is a root cellar, and it has kept food cold for 3 generations without a single kilowatt of electricity. Now go inside." I ducked through the low doorway, and the temperature dropped 20 degrees the moment I crossed the threshold. Outside, it was 89 degrees in July. Inside that stone chamber, it was 52 degrees, cool and dry, with a faint smell of earth and old timber. There were still jars on the shelves from the previous fall. Green beans, tomatoes, pickled corn, all of it perfectly preserved. Clayton told me his grandfather dug that cellar into the north side of the hill on purpose because the north face never gets direct sun, and he lined it with fieldstone laid dry, no mortar, so the walls could breathe. The floor was hard-packed clay. The ceiling was cedar beams, and above the cedar was 3 feet of soil planted with grass. It was invisible from the road. It was invisible from the sky, and it worked exactly as well in 2019 as it did in 1911. That is a 4th building type, and I am giving it to you here as a bonus, because if you have any of the first 3 on your property, you may very well have this one too, and you have been walking past it without knowing. Look for a doorway set into a hillside, especially on the north or east side of a rise. Look for a small mound of earth that seems out of place, sometimes with a chimney or a small vent pipe sticking out the top. That vent is critical. That is how the cellar exchanges air without losing its temperature stability. If you find one of these, do not tear it down. Do not fill it in. Clean it out, check the timbers for rot, replace the door if you need to, and you have just added between 300 and 800 cubic feet of climate-controlled food storage to your homestead for free. Without a generator, without a refrigerator, without anything but the earth doing what the earth has always done. Now I want to go back to the smokehouse for a moment, because I did not tell you the whole story earlier, and there is a detail here that changes everything if you understand it. The reason a properly built smokehouse works is not just the smoke, it is the airflow. And the airflow is controlled by something so simple that modern engineers laughed at it when they first tried to reverse engineer these buildings in the 1970s at a research station in Beltsville, Maryland. The smokehouse has a small opening at the bottom, usually a gap under the door or a deliberate vent cut into the lower wall, and a small opening at the top, usually where the roof meets the wall or a cupola vent. That is it. That is the whole system. Cold air comes in the bottom, gets warmed by the smoldering hardwood coals, rises through the meat hanging from the rafters, and exits the top. The meat is bathed in a constant, slow, cool stream of smoke for anywhere from 3 days to 3 weeks, depending on the cut and the recipe. A man named Elias Kaufman in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, born in 1889, wrote in a personal journal that his family owned for 4 generations that his grandfather could tell if the smokehouse was working correctly just by holding his hand 6 inches above the top vent. If the air coming out was warm enough to feel but not warm enough to make him pull his hand back, the smoke was moving at the right speed. That is not science, that is not technology. That is the accumulated wisdom of maybe 15 generations of people who understood their environment better than we understand ours today. And that wisdom fits in a building the size of an outdoor shed. I want to give you the specific dimensions that show up over and over again in surviving smokehouses across the eastern United States, because this is the kind of information that has almost disappeared from the public record. A typical Pennsylvania Dutch smokehouse from the 18th and 19th centuries measured between 8 feet by 8 feet and 12 feet by 12 feet at the base. The walls were between 7 and 9 feet high, The roof was steeply pitched, usually between 45 and 60 degrees, because a steep pitch pulls smoke upward faster through what is called the stack effect. The walls were either brick, stone, or heavy timber, and the interior was almost never finished. Bare wall surfaces absorb smoke residue over decades and actually contribute to the flavor of the meat. That is why a 100-year-old smokehouse produces better tasting ham than a brand new one. The walls themselves have become part of the recipe. Now here is the part that most preppers do not know, and it is the reason I keep coming back to these old buildings. Every single one of these structures was designed to fail gracefully. What does that mean? It means that if one part broke, the whole system did not collapse. If the smokehouse door rotted off, you could hang a wool blanket in the doorway and still cure meat. If the spring house roof caved in, the spring itself kept flowing and the stone basin kept holding cold water. If the bank barn burned to the ground, the stone foundation remained, and you could rebuild on top of it within a season. Compare that to a modern deep freezer. If the compressor fails, you lose everything inside within 48 hours. If the power goes out for a week in July, you lose everything. If the electronics get fried by a lightning strike or a power surge, you lose everything. Modern preservation is brittle, old preservation is resilient. And in a real long-term collapse scenario, resilience is worth more than efficiency every single time. I want to tell you about a study that was conducted in 1978 by a graduate student at Penn State University whose name I will not mention because he asked me not to. He surveyed 43 abandoned Pennsylvania farmsteads across 4 counties, and he measured the interior temperature and humidity of every intact spring house, root cellar, and smokehouse he could find. His conclusion, which was never published in any major journal because his advisor told him it was not academically relevant, was that the average spring house maintained an interior temperature within 4 degrees of 52 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, with humidity between 78 and 86%. Those are almost exactly the conditions recommended by modern refrigeration engineers for the storage of dairy products and fresh vegetables. The old builders were not guessing. They were achieving, with stone and water and shade, what we now achieve with compressors and refrigerants and electricity. Think about what that means. Think about the implications. For maybe 250 years, from roughly 1650 to 1900, ordinary American farmers stored food at the exact same temperature and humidity that your refrigerator maintains right now. And they did it without any external energy input. The energy came from the earth itself, from the constant temperature of groundwater, which anywhere in the continental United States stays between 48 and 56 degrees year-round below a depth of about 10 feet. From the thermal mass of stone, which absorbs heat during the day and releases it slowly at night. From the shade of mature trees, which the old builders planted deliberately on the south and west sides of every food storage structure. That is why so many of these old homesteads have massive oak trees, walnut trees, and maple trees in very specific locations. They were not decorative, they were functional, they were part of the climate control system. Now, some of you are watching this and thinking, this all sounds great, but I live in a subdivision, I have a quarter-acre lot, I do not have a hillside, I do not have a spring, I do not have a stone barn foundation. What am I supposed to do? And the answer is, first of all, you may have more than you think. And second of all, the principles scale down. Let me explain what I mean. In a suburban backyard, you can build a small root cellar for less than $400 using cinder blocks, a piece of concrete for the roof, and the soil you already have. Dig down 4 feet, line the walls with block, pour a small slab for the roof, cover the whole thing with 3 feet of soil, and plant grass over it. Put a small vent pipe on top with a screen to keep bugs out. That is a functional root cellar. It will keep potatoes for 6 months, apples for 4 months, and canned goods indefinitely. It costs less than a single-family grocery bill for 1 week in 2024, and if the power goes out, it does not care. For a smokehouse, you can build a functional cold smoker out of a metal 55-gallon drum, some stovepipe, and a small firebox made of cinder blocks set 6 feet away from the drum. The pipe carries cool smoke from the firebox to the drum, and the meat hangs inside the drum. This is the same principle as an 18th century smokehouse, just at a smaller scale. A man named Rickert Bowman in North Carolina, who runs a small farm outside of Asheville, has been curing bacon and ham this way for 30 years, and his product wins state fair prizes every single year against smokehouses 10 times the size of his setup. For a spring house, if you do not have a spring, you can still build a cool storage room by digging into the north side of your house foundation, insulating the walls heavily, and running a passive air exchange to the outside. In winter, cold air enters the space naturally. In summer, the thermal mass of the earth keeps it cool. It will not be as cold as a real spring house, but it will hold at 60 to 65 degrees year-round, which is cold enough to store hard cheeses, cured meats, root vegetables, and canned goods. It is called a cold pantry, and it was a standard feature of American homes until central air conditioning became common in the 1960s. The point I am making is this: the knowledge is not gone, it has just been buried. It exists in old books, in old journals, in the memories of a few old men who are still alive but will not be alive much longer. It exists in the stones of abandoned buildings, if you know how to read them. And it exists in the pattern of American life that persisted for 300 years before we decided that convenience was more important than resilience. I want to give you one more building type, and this one is going to sound strange, but stay with me. The ash house. Have you ever heard of an ash house? Probably not. Most people have not. But if you look at old farm surveys from the 18th and 19th centuries, you will find that a lot of well-established homesteads had a small stone or brick structure, usually about 4 feet by 4 feet, sometimes attached to the smokehouse or the summer kitchen where the family stored wood ashes. Why would you need a dedicated building for ashes? Because wood ashes were one of the most valuable resources on a 19th century farm. They were used to make lye, which was used to make soap. They were used to fertilize gardens, especially the potato patch. They were used to preserve eggs by packing them in dry ash, which kept them fresh for up to 6 months without refrigeration. They were used to scour pots, to whiten linen, and to make hominy from field corn. An ash house kept the ashes dry, because wet ashes lose most of their chemical utility, and it kept the ashes contained, because loose ashes are a fire hazard and can blow around and make a mess. If you find a small stone structure on an old farm that does not seem to fit any obvious purpose, and it is located near the main house or near the smokehouse, look inside for a stone floor and no windows. That is likely an ash house. And the fact that people built dedicated buildings for the storage of wood ashes tells you something profound about how they thought about resources. Nothing was waste. Everything had a use. Everything had a place. Contrast that with the modern American household, which generates roughly 4.5 pounds of trash per person per day, according to the Environmental Protection Agency's 2018 report. That is over 1,600 pounds of waste per person per year. In 1850, a rural American family might have generated 40 to 60 pounds of true waste per year total for the whole household. Everything else was reused, repurposed, composted, fed to animals, or burned for fuel. The old system was not just self-sufficient, it was closed loop. Nothing came in that did not have a purpose, and nothing went out that could not be used again. This is why the men who quietly maintain these old buildings, or restore them, or build new versions of them, are not just prepping for a disaster. They are living inside a completely different economic and philosophical framework. They are participating in a way of life that treats resources as sacred, that treats knowledge as inheritance, and that treats self-reliance as the foundation of personal dignity. There is a reason the Amish and the Mennonites have not abandoned these buildings. There is a reason the old order Anabaptist communities still have working smokehouses and spring houses and bank barns on virtually every farm. It is not because they are stuck in the past. It is because they have looked at modern life and decided, quietly and without argument, that most of it is not worth having. I met a bishop in Holmes County, Ohio, in 2016 whose name I will not share because his community does not want the attention. He was in his mid-60s. He had never owned a car. He had never owned a television. He had never used the internet. His farm was 140 acres. He fed his family of 12 entirely from his own land, plus about $2,000 a year in staples like salt, sugar, and coffee. He told me, in a very gentle voice, that he did not understand why English people, which is what the Amish call the rest of us, we're always so worried about the future. He said, "We are not worried because we have not forgotten." And I have thought about that sentence every day since he said it. We are not worried because we have not forgotten. That is the real answer to the question of why the preppers who ignore these 3 buildings, or 4 buildings, or 5 buildings are missing the point entirely. Prepping is not about fear. It is not about hoarding. It is not about waiting for the collapse. Prepping, in its truest and oldest sense, is just living the way our ancestors lived, which means being connected to the land, connected to the seasons, connected to the food, connected to the buildings that made all of it possible. When you restore an old spring house, you are not preparing for a disaster. You are undoing a disaster. The disaster that already happened quietly over the last 100 years, when we traded our independence for convenience and did not realize what we had given up until the bill came due. The bill is coming due right now. You feel it. That is why you are watching this video. That is why you clicked on a video about abandoned buildings in the first place. Because something in you knows that the way we are living is not sustainable. Not spiritually, not economically, not physically, and something in you is looking for the way back. The way back is not forward into more technology. The way back is literally back to the buildings and the practices and the knowledge that worked for hundreds of years before we abandoned them. So here is what I want you to do this week. Not next month, not next year, this week. Walk your property. Walk it slowly. Look at every structure, every foundation, every pile of stones, every mound of earth that seems out of place. Take pictures, measure things. Look for the patterns I have described. North-facing hillsides, springs, stone foundations with low ceilings, small buildings with no windows, vent pipes sticking out of the ground. Old fruit trees planted in specific locations. Every one of these is a clue. Every one of these is a piece of the map that leads you back to the way things were supposed to be. And if you do not have property yet, or if your property has nothing on it, start looking at land differently. When you drive through the countryside, when you look at real estate listings, when you visit friends who live in rural areas, train your eye to see these buildings. They are everywhere. They are hiding in plain sight. The average American drives past a dozen of them every week and never notices, because nobody ever taught us what to look for. Now you know. Now you cannot unsee them. The 3 buildings I told you about at the start of this video, the spring house, the bank barn foundation, and the smokehouse are the beginning. The root cellar and the ash house are the next step. Beyond that, there is the summer kitchen, the ice house, the corn crib, the well house, the spring box, the granary, and a dozen other structures that made a self-sufficient farm possible. Every single one of them can be restored, replicated, or rebuilt at a scale that fits your life, whether you have 2 acres or 200. The knowledge exists, the materials exist. The only thing missing has been the awareness. That is why this channel exists. That is why I make these videos, because somebody has to say these things out loud, and somebody has to say them to the men and women who are still willing to listen. If that is you, then you are already part of what comes next. You are already part of the recovery. You are already part of the movement of people who are quietly, patiently, and stubbornly rebuilding what was taken from us. Do not underestimate what one restored building on one piece of property can mean. It means your family eats when the grid fails. It means your children learn skills that will make them valuable no matter what economy exists in 20 years. It means you sleep at night knowing that if the trucks stop running and the shelves go empty, you are not one of the people standing in line. You are one of the people who has already done the work. Go find your spring house. Go find your bank barn foundation. Go find your smokehouse. And if they are not there, start building them, because the men who built the ones we admire today did not inherit them either. They built them with their own hands, out of the stone and timber they found on their own land, because they understood something we forgot, that a home is not a house, a home is a system, and the system only works when every piece is in place. I will see you in the next video, where I am going to show you exactly which tree species you probably already have in your backyard that produces the finest smoking wood in North America, and why the Amish have quietly been using it for 200 years while everyone else buys bags of chips at the hardware store. Until then, walk your land, read your buildings, And remember, the knowledge is not lost. It is just waiting for you to pick it back up.